Sense. So on the end of the day, he gets more gold, we get more gold. I mean, many will be happy. I'll just do what I'll do. Spend it.
Tony Beets. Known for his ruthless efficiency, unyielding work ethic, and unmatched skill in gold dredging, Tony has built an empire where others struggle to survive. But beneath the reputation of a savvy businessman lies a man whose temper, stubbornness, and relentless drive have earned him as many enemies as followers. For years, warnings circulated among new miners, crew members, and even seasoned veterans. Be careful with Tony Beets. Listen to the cautionary tales. Respect his rules, or you will pay the price. Many dismiss these warnings, chalking them up to exaggeration or the bravado of a reality TV show. After all, Tony Beets is a legend on Gold Rush, a man who commands respect and admiration from viewers around the world. But reality isn't scripted. When people crossed lines, underestimated his determination, or ignored the subtle signs, the consequences were immediate and unforgiving. He doesn't yell, he doesn't bluff. He simply lets the situation unfold. And by the time you realize your mistake, it's too late. The truth is, Tony Beets isn't just challenging because of fire, machinery, or the harsh environment of the Klondike. He's challenging because he is relentless, strategic, and unafraid to test anyone who steps into his world. And while many may have laughed at the warnings, Tony was quietly setting the stage for what would become one of the most intense, feared, and talked about moments in his entire career, a situation where even his famous humor couldn't save him. By the time officials and outsiders began to take notice, the problem wasn't just about gold, machines, or weather. It was about land, ownership, and rules that even Tony couldn't bend. And suddenly, the warnings that had been ignored for years became terrifyingly real. Tony Beets has always been one of the most formidable figures on Gold Rush, a man whose reputation for toughness and precision is matched only by his wealth of experience. His dredges are massive, his operations meticulous, and his approach to gold mining is both brilliant and intimidating. But Tony's legend comes with a warning. Cross him, underestimate him, or ignore his rules, and you will face consequences that are far more serious than a simple rebuke. For new miners stepping into the Yukon, for crews hoping to prove themselves, and even for veteran gold seekers, Tony represents a test, a trial of endurance, skill, and respect. Those who have worked with him understand quickly that Tony Beets isn't just a miner. He is a force of nature in his own right, someone whose every decision can make or break careers. Many of Tony's warnings are subtle, almost imperceptible. He doesn't threaten, he doesn't shout, and he rarely loses his temper in a way that is dramatic or obvious on camera. Yet for those paying attention, every glance, every instruction, every rule carries weight. Early in his career, crew members learned that ignoring these cues could lead to disaster. Machinery can fail. Crews can be injured, and while Tony often jokes with his team and teases newcomers, behind the humor lies a man who demands absolute competence and respect for the land he owns. This balance of mentorship and intimidation is what has kept Tony Beets at the top of the game, but it is also what makes him one of the most feared figures in modern gold mining. The real turning point came when warnings that had circulated for years began to manifest in ways that no one could ignore. Officials, miners, and even neighboring operators began noticing irregularities, small disputes over property, and the complex legal boundaries surrounding Tony's land. This wasn't about quarrels or disagreements over equipment. It was about ownership, jurisdiction, and the potential for conflict that could escalate beyond anyone's control. Miners who had laughed at previous stories of Tony's relentless tactics suddenly realized that his reputation was well earned. The man they joked about on social media, admired from a distance, and underestimated for television drama was in reality capable of taking actions that could leave them completely exposed. And while Tony Beets is famous for his humor, his relentless work ethic, and his ability to overcome the harshest elements of the Yukon, there came a moment when not even his wittiness could shield him from the consequences of oversight, misjudgment, or miscalculation. For those who had ignored the warnings, the truth became undeniable. Tony Beets isn't just a legend on television. He is a man whose influence over land, machinery, and mining operations is absolute. When the government began taking notice, investigating, and enforcing regulations, it became clear that the problem was far bigger than anyone had anticipated. And suddenly, the tales that were once dismissed as exaggerations, rumors, or entertainment became painfully real, proving that in Tony Beets' world, ignoring the warnings is a mistake you only get to make once. The warnings about Tony Beets were never just about his personality or his abrasive style. They were about consequences. Seasoned miners, past crew members, and industry insiders all shared the same sentiment. Tony doesn't take shortcuts, he doesn't overlook mistakes, and he certainly doesn't tolerate incompetence. For those new to the Yukon, this could feel intimidating or even unfair, but for Tony, it's about survival and efficiency. Every decision, every maneuver, and every investment has a direct impact on whether gold is recovered or lost. And when Tony perceives negligence, disobedience, or disrespect, the repercussions are swift and absolute. Unlike the dramatized conflicts viewers see on camera, these real-life consequences aren't exaggerated for entertainment. They are grounded in decades of experience, skill, and an unrelenting approach to business. For many, the turning point came not through warnings or stories, but through first-hand experience. Miners who had worked with Tony on his dredges often recount incidents that tested their nerves and judgment. Some describe moments where a wrong move could cost thousands of dollars in lost gold or damaged equipment. Others talk about the mental pressure of meeting Tony's high standards day after day in extreme conditions. Mistakes are not easily forgiven. Tony's philosophy is simple. The land and the machinery demand respect, and anyone unwilling to meet that standard will feel the consequences. As one former crew member explained, he doesn't yell, he doesn't make threats. You just know, and if you ignore it, you pay for it. The situation escalated when officials and regulators began examining Tony's operations more closely. What had once been dismissed as minor discrepancies or industry rumors revealed a complex web of land ownership, permits, and operational boundaries. Tony's meticulous attention to detail in running his dredges and mining claims became a double-edged sword. It was his strength, but it also exposed him to scrutiny. Authorities quickly realized that the stakes were higher than expected. Any misstep, oversight, or miscommunication could trigger legal challenges, fines, or restrictions. And while Tony was capable of handling machinery and crew with unrivaled skill, this was a situation where rules and regulations mattered as much as grit and determination. For viewers, the tension might have seemed like reality TV drama, arguments, minor accidents, and disagreements over strategy. But for those on the ground, it was a lesson in respecting a man who had mastered the Yukon over decades. Tony Beets' reputation for toughness, his uncompromising standards, and his ability to enforce discipline were not just anecdotes. They were real warnings about the consequences of ignoring someone who controlled not just gold, but the land itself. The lesson became crystal clear. Tony's humor, his charm, and his playful teasing were secondary to one undeniable truth. In the Yukon, ignoring his rules comes at a price, and those who fail to respect his authority do so at their own peril. Even with all the warnings, some miners thought they could bend the rules, push boundaries, or navigate Tony Beets' operations without fully respecting his authority. Early in one particularly brutal season, a new crew member made a critical miscalculation. Equipment was mishandled, protocols ignored, and a minor accident quickly escalated into a serious risk. Tony's response was swift and decisive. There were no dramatized confrontations or staged arguments for the cameras, just action. Machinery was shut down, errors corrected, and the consequences delivered with unflinching precision. For the new miner, it was a harsh lesson in accountability. For the rest of the crew, it served as a reminder that Tony's reputation was not built on exaggeration, but on decades of experience, vigilance, and an unwavering expectation of excellence. What makes Tony Beets particularly feared is not just his strict management style, but his unpredictability when rules are ignored. He doesn't always react in ways others anticipate. Sometimes he is calm, quiet, and observant, letting mistakes pile up just enough to teach a lesson without causing permanent harm. Other times, the consequences are immediate, making it painfully clear that underestimating him is a dangerous gamble. For miners working long hours in sub-zero temperatures, the stakes are already high. Add Tony's scrutiny and exacting standards, and the environment transforms into one where every decision matters. Crew members learn quickly that the warnings they might have shrugged off before are not optional. They are essential for survival, safety, and success. But the tension reached a tipping point when government officials started scrutinizing Tony's operations. The warnings about his fierce control of land and dredges became reality. Regulatory bodies began reviewing permits, property boundaries, and environmental compliance. Tony, who had spent years mastering every detail of his mining empire, now faced challenges that no amount of experience or skill could fully prepare him for. This wasn't about machinery or gold. This was about authority, legality, and the consequences of operating in one of the most remote and high-stakes gold mining regions in the world. For Tony, even his trademark humor couldn't mitigate the seriousness of the situation. The very land he had claimed, built, and worked on for decades was suddenly under scrutiny. And the stakes had never been higher. What the warnings didn't fully convey to those watching from the outside was how personal the consequences of missteps could be. Tony's relentless drive, uncompromising standards, and unmatched knowledge of the Yukon meant that mistakes could have financial, legal, and professional repercussions. Crew members and fellow miners who ignored prior warnings quickly realized that Tony Beets' reputation was not a myth or exaggeration. It was a testament to a man who controlled his world with precision, authority, and a level of intensity few could match. Those who once doubted the stories learned the hard way. Respecting Tony is not optional, and failing to do so comes at a cost that can't be laughed off. The climax of the warnings came when Tony Beets faced what many miners had feared for years: government scrutiny of his land and operations. While fans of Gold Rush had grown accustomed to watching his incredible dredging feats and dramatic disputes on camera, this situation was far more serious. Officials examined permits, boundaries, and environmental compliance, and for the first time, Tony couldn't rely solely on experience, skill, or intimidation to navigate the challenges. The very land he had worked tirelessly to claim, cultivate, and exploit was now under a microscope, and every decision carried real-world consequences that could impact not only his livelihood, but the futures of those who depended on him. For Tony, the situation demanded a delicate balance. He had to assert authority without escalating conflict, comply with regulations without compromising operations, and maintain control over crews while navigating legal boundaries he had not faced before. Unlike fire, machinery failures, or harsh weather, challenges he had conquered countless times, this problem could not be overcome with strength, wit, or sheer stubbornness. It required strategy, diplomacy, and careful maneuvering, all while maintaining the same level of productivity and precision he demanded from his team. For the miners who had previously dismissed the warnings, the reality was stark. Tony Beets' reputation was more than just a persona. It was a blueprint for survival, and ignoring it could lead to disaster. This was also a turning point for the crews and colleagues around him. Those who had once laughed at tales of Tony's temper or shrugged off cautionary advice suddenly understood the seriousness of his methods. They saw firsthand that Tony's warnings were not idle threats, but lessons learned from decades of operating in one of the harshest, most unforgiving mining environments on Earth. His reputation for ruthlessness was tempered by his knowledge, efficiency, and unshakable control over every aspect of his operations. Those who had previously underestimated him quickly realized that respecting Tony wasn't just a matter of etiquette. It was essential for survival, safety, and success in the Yukon. And yet, even in the face of scrutiny, Tony Beets remained unshaken. He adapted to the legal challenges, navigated regulatory pressures, and ensured that his operations continued to run at peak efficiency. But the warnings that had circulated for years proved prescient. No amount of skill, charm, or bravado could replace the consequences of ignoring Tony Beets' rules, understanding his authority, and respecting the land he had claimed. By the end of the season, it became clear that the man who had once been seen as simply a tough reality TV star was, in truth, a master strategist whose foresight, discipline, and unwavering standards were unmatched in the industry. In the end, the lessons are undeniable. Tony Beets is not a figure to underestimate, a challenge to take lightly, or a man whose warnings can be ignored. He embodies the unforgiving combination of experience, authority, and intelligence required to thrive in the Yukon's most demanding environment. And for those who dismissed the signs, the stories, and the advice, the consequences were immediate, unforgettable, and real. In Tony Beets' world, the warnings weren't just reputation, they were reality. Because in the Yukon, you don't just mine gold. You survive the man in charge, and Tony Beets is always in charge.